Hello chess fans, welcome back to 101 Ways to Win or Lose a Game of Chess. I am your host, Onyx Chess, and today we will resume our insight on the matter of imbalances. Today we're going to look at the issue of development. Now, development really is just another word for creating potential. Okay, I think we all are fairly clear that pieces on, their starting squares cannot possibly checkmate enemy kings. So at some point, these pieces on the back row have to get active and find good squares where they can be effective and force a checkmate at some point. All right, and that's what development really is just talking about. I think another point to say is, if your opponent can manage to actually get more pieces out and active and doing more things than you, while yours, your pieces are all still back on the back row, well, not only have they made room for the king to castle and so on, but they've also they're going to be taking up space. All right, all kinds of squares all over the board are going to be unavailable for you to use because your opponent got there first. All right, so this is a good thing to do when we can control squares first. It's going to stop our opponent from using those squares. There's all kinds of exponential almost benefits to just getting your pieces out and developing. You don't have to see the game from move 1 to move 50 start to finish in order to know what move 1 should be. All right, and that's often why people play in the center. It's just theoretically sound. It's fundamentally solid. All right, kind of a thing. So again, that's the kind of thing we want to do. We want to get our pieces out and so on. Now, black usually plays Sicilian, but in this game, black had a mouse slip. So black said, "All right, you know what? Let's play Carl Khan. This game is not lost. Let's see what happens if we can just maybe apply some fundamentals and some creativity and see if we can maybe fight back to good effect." Here, obviously, as we spoke about in the original series between center and space, we see white doing both of those. All right, center and space are white. Thus far, it's going to be up to black to make a case that white should not control the entirety of the board. All right, and black's going to do that just by addressing the center. This is very fundamental, simple, and straightforward. It's kind of what you got to do. It's kind of how you got to play. I'm certain that there are other moves, but for my intents and purposes, for our understanding of board positions, just to allow white to mitigate black's activity, basically to the 6th, 7th, and 8th rank is a little bit unacceptable. I think black really wants to stretch his feet. I think black really wants to get his position unwound and provide opportunity for his pieces. I think that's probably the paramount concern right now for black. Not taking material, not even castling, not even necessarily taking space, but just really just getting some pieces out there before we get boxed in completely. All right, because that's going to rob our opportunity, and from that will stem less opportunity still until there's no opportunity and we find ourselves checkmated. So that's what black does, attacks the center. This is not about center, this is not about space, it's about development. So that's what we'll focus on. Now white has one piece developed, okay, and black has one piece developed. This is for all intents and purposes even. Okay, both sides have a piece out and so on. There are subtleties in this position though that I think white noticed as well, which is one, the f6, pardon me, the c6 square is not available for black's knight to eyeball and pressure center squares. All right, now that's not like a huge deal, but at the same time also it's really kind of telegraphing that black's not going to be comfortable castling queenside unless necessary. All right, because with white's black bishop still on the board, that could prove very challenging for black to defend. kind of a thing. So this is just, little notes that we're making to ourselves. Further, black's going to have to make another pawn move at some point here to access the power of this black bishop. It's boxed in. All right, whereas white's bishops are completely ready to go. So in terms of development, we would say white's ahead here. Yes, only one piece is out for white. Yes, one piece is out for black. But white's a little ahead here simply for these kinds of factors. All right, so white sensing he's a little ahead, plays, I guess, a little bit of a strange move. Very strange. It's fairly clear white must have been thinking black takes, pawn takes, and now white is absolutely dominant with total and complete control of the board, ready to develop in every way, whereas black is a little bit stuck here with a awkward knight little bit, and a bishop that has its work cut out for before he gets castle. And white would even be considering here just castling kingside after, two moves of development, wherever you put the queen, I don't know, wherever. And white's castled away and ready to attack hard down the middle with a rook looking straight down the d file, supporting the d pawn and making life very difficult for black. This is what must have been going through white's mind, but of course the bishop doesn't have to take that knight and make white completely better. The bishop actually can just stay where it is, or this is a tempo. Why waste a tempo? Okay, in order to make white's position better, why not just use that tempo for something else, something productive? All right, and that's what black probably does. Now I think probably black wants to play e5 here. And again, we always have to keep in mind that we don't want our position cramped too hard. White is completely eligible for queenside castle. So white really does not need the g2 pawn where it's at. That g2 pawn can touch g4, no problem. h4, and a lot of pressure and space is going to be lost by black on the king side. And this could be very, 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 very troubling if black has ideas of playing something like g6, maybe fianchettoing the bishop, where black's just under immediate attack. Okay, white's pawns might be just far too quick for even a kingside castle here. In fact, in this kind of a position right now, black is probably already considering queenside. Just abandon the kingside entirely. It looks like white's going to control that. I don't think that's the biggest deal. Aside from that is where black's king would have wanted to castle. But aside from that, this bishop comes back here, this knight comes up here, and there's no kind of immediate tactics or anything to really worry about on the king side just yet. I think black would be okay with that. So all in all, we call it equal, but we don't stop there. Okay, because we're going to always look at what pieces do where they sit, which is the fundamentals, and we're going to always look at what happens after they move, which is the tactics. And you'll notice here that white has opened up a diagonal to the king. This diagonal is a diagonal that the black queen has direct access to. She needn't move anywhere to access that square. She may check that king immediately after moves like, say, e6 or even e5. What's the big deal? Of course, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, queen says check, and queen will win a pawn with tempo, where she would check the king again in some certain variations. Okay, so we're always like playing as far as the tactics will allow, and white needs to appreciate this. Okay, white needs to appreciate what that f3 move has done to his position. It needs to be understood, not calculated. This isn't something where we're gonna sit back and just randomly calculate tactics like a machine until we find something that may or may not be good. No. What we do is we simply understand that a diagonal is open to that king that the queen touches, and we just kind of file that to the side. Don't worry, it will always come up. And if not, other narratives will. And this is where the tactics come from. This is where we calculate. So forever in a day, will we be randomly calculating tactics? No. But when we see that diagonal open like that, we'll always be, from now on, trying to factor in some kind of a tactic, where white's forced to maybe trade in the center, and then, lose a pawn some way, somehow. It's just in the back of our mind. What often can happen is, as we're calculating other things, even on the other side of the board, we can realize that certain issues that we might pose to white here on the other side of the board, or even with completely different pieces or whatever, certain issues we can pose to white are likely going to have the best defense, cause white to weaken itself in another spot to where this tactic isn't possible here. Black might even be able to at some point play e5, threatening a bishop on one of these squares or so, whatever, and away goes the queen, check, takes in the middle. Alright, so we're always kind of keeping in mind the different kinds of tactics. So white wants to play safe as far as the tactics will allow, and black wants to achieve his plans as far as the tactics will allow. So playing on, again, if the freeing move is e5, then knight to d7 makes a little bit of sense here. Okay, really that's what it's about. This is to say, look, I just don't care for your complete and total dominance on the center. This is making a stand against that. It is certainly telegraphing e5, and we'll play from there. Okay, again, you don't have to see the whole board and do everything all at once. We can go through this some more and talk about what happens if knight out here and pawn to e6 and pawn to e5, but I think we're getting the idea now that getting the pieces out is primary. That's what's going to set up the opportunity. That's where all of your potential comes from, and that's another main reason, if nothing else, why we would develop that knight, to d7. It's just to ensure that we can get our pieces out. Okay, because we already said, due to the pressure on the king side with his pawns, bishop to g7 probably won't be playable here. Okay, which means bishop has to come out down that diagonal, which means the pawn on e7 has to move, and that's a little bit of a priority, and so we set up that knight as a preparing move for e5. Now, when I play Caro-Kann, I always see people move e6 all the time. I imagine that's book, whatever. I have to play my own game. Alright, white develops a piece. I'm not sure, this pawn wasn't really attacked, but I mean, it had to get out some way, somehow. Or one of his bishops better out first, I don't know, who cares. Development's about even. Okay, let's continue, and we see now e5, not e6, simply because that undermines the whole reason of knight to d7. It undermines black's entire plan of being able to unwind the position. e6 just feels too cramped still. Now maybe it is better, because the bishop can still get out, the knight can still get out, but this challenges the center immediately, and it's just unclear how it's dangerous for black to play e5 straight away. Alright, a pawn on e6 I suppose would help stop d5, but it's unclear that that's what white wants to play anytime soon. Don't forget, black has this resource here, so the queen is actually defending d5 right now, because there's always that intermezzo check where d5 can be contacted. So it's unclear, but you gotta play with what you know. Alright, you can't say, when people play Caro-Kann, they always play e6, so that is what I will do too for their reasons. I cannot play my own reasons. I must play chess the way other people play. That is the rule. No, you can't do that, man. You have to play your own moves, your own reasons, with everything behind it, and then everything's gonna make sense on move 10, 20, and 30. When you start trying to play other people's moves, putting pieces on squares that don't make sense to you fully, that you don't understand fully, it's no wonder then in move 20 and 30 you don't understand fully what's going on the board and what you should be looking at and trying to achieve, and seeing if the tactics will allow you to achieve those ends. Alright, so e5 here. Bishop comes out, stopping all ideas of the check to that side. Okay, now it's an interesting question put to black here. And again, this is about development, so it's a little bit tough to really ignore important things and important considerations, because if we went down that rabbit hole, this would be a 2-hour lecture real fast. Alright, likely across only 4 moves, probably. Alright, because that's how intense chess can be. There's a lot to be said for chess. Okay, it's an expansive topic. Alright, but maybe it's worth noting here what's going on and why we maybe shouldn't play so automatic, and why we should put a little bit of thought into the moves that we make, and why we stick with the themes and we stick with the theory as far as the tactics will allow. Here's the thing. Black's objective is to develop. Okay, we've helped counteract that center with that pawn push. Okay, but we've still got, alright, 11 points sitting here off in the corner doing nothing in specific. Alright, that king has to get castle at some point, and right now it's probably looking kingside is the way to go here. Again, with white's black bishop still on the board, this could be a very damaging diagonal for black at this point in the game. So nonetheless, these pieces can't checkmate a king from where they are either. So they have got to get out and they've got to start being productive. You can see how many squares white is contacting. We can see how many squares on black side of the board that white affects, but then you look at the other way around and where's black's force, where's black's effect? Okay, nothing really to be spoke of, not really. Okay, and after g4 it's going to be even less. So yeah, it's counterplay is necessary, so that kind of fact needs to factor in, and that's why a move, just in terms of meaning and in terms of narrative and in terms of intention and what we want to see get done here, probably isn't the way to play here. f6 is probably not the way to go, just because it stymies our development. It's too slow, and if there's any other things that we could do to satiate the issue of this bishop hitting the queen, then we should do it. We can talk about moving the queen, we can talk about knight here, we can talk about bishop here, knight there, and certainly when we're playing the game, we would want to calculate all of these and see if maybe one of them doesn't satiate this issue of the bishop attacking the queen without having to play a move like f6. And of course, after pawn takes e6, this king's gonna have nowhere to go for the rest of the game, while white has all of its pieces on the board, and that's a fatal combination almost all the time. All right, especially with no kind of initiative or force or counterplay in the near future for black. All right. Long story short, we can get into the calculations, but this is about development. Why not queen here? Why not queen here? Why not bishop here? These kinds of things. All good questions. A wonderful continuation to be blocked with the bishop. If bishop takes, knight takes, and black is just looking pretty as can be. But of course, bishop wouldn't take bishop here. It would be a little bit questionable. So here, black chooses to block with the knight. Okay. Now, the thing about this is it is developing. The thing about this is you've got these knights now in communication. Just like you have a 2 bishop advantage, knights that are well placed and in contact with each other like this is a powerful idea often. All right, particularly the way they overlook the central squares and extended central squares. Okay, but at least it's developing. Now white makes an interesting choice to double black's pawns. Again, we can get into what happens if knight and then bishop and then don't, let's not worry about, this is about development. Black's pawns are doubled, and let's just check the development now we see that, you know, white was really trading imbalances here, okay, because where white was at least kind of evenish as far as development went, white has said, hey, you know, black doesn't have a castle on the queen side, black doesn't have a castle on the king side, black's gonna have a tough end game, and I'll give up my equal stake in development. So here we see it's actually black now that's ahead in development. Alright, and black needs to be noticing this. If he's been given development in exchange for long-term king safety and long-term end game, you know, viability, where his pawns are going to be much easier targets in an end game than white's, black needs to understand that. Okay, if white has said, here, you take development, I'll take your king safety in the end game, then black needs to know, okay, development. And usually, as far as tactics allow, it's a good idea to expand on your advantages, expand on the beneficial narratives running through your position. In this case, we're talking about development. So black develops another piece, alright, with tempo. Okay, now not only that, but there's a very, listen, you want it as far as tactics allow. If tactics did not allow queen to a5, we should not be playing queen to a5. Alright, yes, we want to develop our pieces, so obviously the queen has to get out or the bishop has to get out some way, but only if the tactics allow. Maybe the tactics dictate we need to stop a mate in 3 somehow. Alright, so the tactics kind of are a little bit like the traffic laws, okay? But in this case, you know, queen a5 works nice. Alright, queen a5 works nice because it massages white's position a little bit. Black would be happy for white to do with their castle what black's done with his. Okay, if black's gonna end up castling there, let's massage it a little bit, let's weaken it up a bit, you know, let's make him move some pawns. Now white did block with the knight, but that's okay too, because now again, and with tempo, the threat being of course bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn, check, okay, kind of a thing like this. Alright, it's with tempo, and white has to once again react to this. So to avoid that, obviously, it's not too many moves in the position, and the queen now is sitting in front of a protected bishop, and she's sitting in front of the king. So anytime you have pieces in line with an attacker, be it a rook or a bishop, I don't care how many squares are in between you and the rook. I don't care how many, pieces. And I don't care how many pieces are between you and a bishop. Anytime, you know, your bishop is looking at a king or a queen, anytime, it's just, you know, something you have to pay extreme awareness to and calculate those tactics. Alright, to make sure that you don't have nothing to worry about, but far more times than not, even in ways you don't see, it's going to be problematic, and it's generally a really good idea to take your pieces off of occupied files and diagonals as far as the queen and the king are concerned. Alright, so now it's black's option. Black can go ahead and double pawns, whether you know, white wants to take back with the queen or not, or just with the pawn straight away and leave the queens on. Either way, black has that option where the pawn structures would be completely identical and completely identically broken. You know, kind of interesting, kind of cool, kind of fun, you know. But then black asks the question, where do we you know, sit after that? Where do we After all of that's said and done, what's going on then? And actually, if you look into these kinds of variations, just very quickly, I'm not sure, and I don't care what the computer says, but looking real quickly, here, black to move. Black wouldn't, he's a, loose pawn here, and, maybe black could have played that way. It'd be something to look at. Okay, black's got the development, black's got a pawn target, and so on like that. Who knows? You do what you can. I think black was hoping for more here, though, and he was right to. Okay, because this is a lot of value. All right, there's a lot of issues in white's camp that white has to address right now, and that's going to chew up a lot of clock. All right, white needs to defuse some issues and get his development back, because right now it's black's initiative to say who does what on this board. So black opts not to trade off. Black opts not to do that grind down. Okay, I'm up a pawn, now let me try and grind out an end game kind of deal. Now black wants to conquer. Black wants to force white to resign ultimately. And yeah, bishop takes knight, maybe okay, maybe not, whatever. But black just really just compounds, all right, the pressure, compounds the force, compounds issues in white's camp. Now the queen's not only attacked from the bishop but from the rook as well, and that's gonna be a lot to think about. Okay, so once again, these kinds of things are gonna be costing white clock time. All right, where black doesn't really have to think too hard at all about anything. Black doesn't face X amount of threats from X amount of directions. Okay, that's white's burden to bear, and that's what white signed on for when white said, okay, black, you take the development, but I'll take your king's safety and a long prospect of an endgame. And as you can see, it's unclear that black's even going to be able to effectively chastise the queenside castle anyway. Okay, like how unsafe is black's king? So right now that was looking like a good trade, and black is more than happy. Okay, white challenges the bishop. Very questionable. I'm not sure what was being communicated here or the meaning of this. It seems to be a little bit of a waste of a move, just because obviously that pawn cannot take that bishop anyway, because then the queen just snaps off the rook. Okay, but that said, if the rook at some point did move, then it would be a different story. As soon as the rook moves there or there or there, then okay, then the bishop would be attacked, and black would have to answer for that. But in every variation, worst case scenario, black can just take knight with tempo, and that's not going to be a problem. So black's not worried about that. Bishop stays. Bishop stays. Okay, real simple. Now at this point, again, we want to talk about development, and indirectly I suppose this has everything to do with development, but I want to take a second, I think, and just talk quickly about the difference between grandmasters and lower rated players like yourself and myself and Joe Schmo down the block. And that is to say what? How they beat us. How do grandmasters beat me, you, and the next underrated player? Okay, there's a stigma out there. There's a little bit of a fantasy explanation for why grandmasters thrash you and I, and the statement is, oh, it's because they're tactically more proficient. They're tactical masters, and they're elite. They're tactically elite. They see everything. They have all kinds of depth. They can calculate everything. Now, while I don't necessarily deny that fact, there's no question that the genius in I think pretty much every grandmaster's mind's eye as far as calculating raw tactic calculation goes is on a level that's, yes, unimaginable, sure, but that's not the reason that grandmasters beat me and you. That's not the primary reason, pardon me. That's not the primary reason. Okay. The primary reason is because they can name, 5 things that one piece does, where you and I might only be able to name 3. Okay? And what this means at the end of the day is they're going to be able to have their pieces communicate with each other tactically in ways that you and I just simply don't see, can't possibly see, because we don't understand the connections and the links between the pieces. All right, and this is where a lot of beginners and even long-time players who haven't really considered chess to be anything more than complicated checkers really just don't have much of an idea at all about what's actually going on here and how these grandmasters are finding these kinds of brilliant combinations. The assumption is that grandmasters are just really expert at advanced checkers and they just calculate tactics till they find something deadly. And that's not it. Take this position for example. It's my contention, and I don't know, but I'm fairly certain I'm perfectly correct. It's my contention that the grandmaster's mind simply understands the meaning of these pieces, where they are and what they do. The grandmaster understands that, okay, when that rook moves, I have an issue with my bishop. Until then, my bishop can stay. So it's just a meaningful consideration. It's just there's no tactics involved there. There's no calculation involved. It's real simple. The pawn is pinned. Okay, it's my contention that a grandmaster understands, knows, and sees that this knight is being defended by 2 pieces. All right, that this knight is being attacked by 2 pieces. Okay, so the grandmaster knows that should either or of the defenders be distracted, that knight falls. All right, now again, no tactics or calculation necessary. That's just a statement of fact. That's just, there's a simple meaning there, which is to say these can't be distracted from the role of defending the knight, or the knight falls, unless there's a tactical justification that will absolve that situation. For instance, if the queen came here with check and just did some kind of a, vicious tactical blah blah blah, well, okay, it doesn't really matter then. All right, because one or both of these pieces would be displaced or what have you. The threat's neutralized, but that would take some ingenuity and some luck. Fundamentally speaking, yeah, the grandmaster just knows this knight is skinny on defense, real skinny on defense, by 2 attackers that are going absolutely nowhere. All right. What else does a grandmaster see? A grandmaster understands, not sees. He sees it tactically. He sees that the queen defends the pawn. No, just he understands that this queen is defending the G pawn and the F pawn. All right. So the grandmaster knows that, just understands this queen has to stay on the 2nd row unless he can justify, okay, the C pawn falling. No tactics necessary here. This is just an understanding. You just kind of say, yep, that's a fact. Duly noted. Off to the side you go. Pawn's pinned. Okay. Bishop stays where it is unless the rook moves somewhere. Okay, that's a fact. Duly noted. Okay, so they just create meaning in the board as it stands, and then from there the tactics will visit them. So it's almost like you don't need to really go and calculate infinite amount of tactics. It's more like just understand the meaning of the position, what the fundamentals, what all the pieces do where they sit, and the tactics, what happens when they move. And you just observe them as a matter of fact and as a matter of meaning and as a matter of narrative. And the tactics almost come to you. Because when black plays rook to g8 here, we begin to see some of the things that black was spending his time calculating. Okay, we can say, oh, well, that's double defended. You know, and that pawn's probably, you know, coming up to g4 anyway. But ultimately, this is almost like a little bit of a free move, because white's plan is going to be to activate these 8 points that he has sitting on, you know, extremely useless squares. Those, you know, are very ineffective pieces, where in terms of development, the theme of this lecture, we've got black developed, 10 points developed on the back rank, and another 9 in the front. One of them looking at a king, one of them looking at where the king's gonna be. And we've got the knight, of course, holding down the center, so white can't take more space and stymie black's tactical potential. Okay. So here we can now see the full force of what happens when we take a decisive edge in development. Okay, we can cause a lot of time to come flying off our opponent's clock, because they have a lot to consider, and more likely than not, we can pull them between making one mistake or another. Okay, so here what we're gonna find is this idea of distraction. All right. Yeah, maybe I should retitle it "Development and Distraction," because that's what this is too. It's a clinic on distraction. All right, because everybody is taught the pin. This knight is pinned to the queen, the pin to the king by the bishop, and that's a pin, and that's a fundamental. And the black knight has an X-ray attack on the king, and so on and so forth. But what we're not taught about is what is effectively, yeah, it's an inverted pin. The distraction technique, the distraction idea. All right, where, yes, you know, pieces are tied to defense, and if they're not there to defend them, those pieces can fall. All right. And that's really all it is. So that's your distraction measure. Nothing complicated. It's just the other side of a pin. Okay, so black here really just stymies that development. He ties white's bishop to the defense of the g2 pawn. Okay, he's saying, hold on a sec, not just yet. You have some work to do before you develop that bishop, and in the meantime I'm going to put my rook on a semi-open file. Whether this was a great move or not, don't know, don't care. It made sense, and so that's how black played. As it turns out, white actually helped black here, because, you know, black here is thinking, what if? You know, black's thinking, what if I could distract that bishop from the defense of that pawn? Then I could take that pawn. And of course, we're thinking then what? Ooh, well, then the queen takes the... Let's just look at it. Bishop moves out, I guess not appreciating the meaning and the fundamentals of the position. Maybe just thinking tactically and therefore missing the tactic. Okay. But now black can play straight, take the pawn. Okay. And here we see what? Queen take rook, which is a distraction. Because remember when we were looking at the fundamentals of the position all the way back here, we understood the meaning of what's happening here, where we have two defenders and two attackers. And if only we could distract that pawn, and if only we could distract that queen. Okay, these aren't tactics, that's just meaning. That's it, just meaning. We're finding the meaning in it. You understand? The narrative in it. You understand? And because we're paying attention to the fundamentals like that, because we're paying attention to what each piece does where it sits, and when I say what each piece does where it sits, go watch the hour-and-a-half banger on psychology where we run through what G3 does and where we run through what move 1 E4 actually does. It should make your head spin, the amount of information in 1 E4. If it's not, question if you're playing chess or playing advanced checkers. Seriously, really and truly, make sure you understand this, because without really understanding the idea of what's guarding what and what needs what and everything like that, without understanding the demands of the position, without understanding the fundamentals, what each piece does where it sits, what each piece does where it sits, without understanding that, you're gonna do things like move your bishop, okay, and you're gonna do things like miss the opportunity to take the pawn. So someone here was playing chess and someone here was playing advanced checkers. Do you understand me? And I want to be clear, you might just playing advanced chess, just playing tactically like a cold calculator, yeah, you might touch 2000, 2100, but that's it. You're never going any further at all, period. If I had the calculation skills of when I was younger, I don't know where I'd be right now. Probably at some chess tournament. You understand? Real simple. Alright? So yeah, you know what? People playing strictly people are tactical geniuses. What can I say? And that will get you a certain amount of the way there, but that cannot possibly ever compete with anyone wearing a FIDE title. It just can't happen. At some point you have to start playing chess. This is what we're talking about when we say play chess. We're talking about finding the meaning and moving appropriately based on the meaning. What's the meaning of that? You understand? Real simple. Alright, so this can't be denied. This needs to be fully met with appreciation by me, you, and everybody else. You find out, you know, what's doing what, and you base your plans around that. If only I could distract that queen, that knight would be weak. Says check, and this is game over, you know. And black even gets a little cute here, because after taking the pawn, says check here, instead of just knocking off the rook, black says, you know, I'd rather have two bishops than a rook, and black, you know, chops off those bishops instead, and the game's over and done with in short order. You understand? So this is a lesson not only on development, but also really on the creative and artistic aspect of what a chess move is, really and truly. Okay, and that we're not just playing, you know, advanced checkers by any stretch of the imagination. Again, yes, if you just, you know, cold calculate all day long, and chess is about looking for tactics that leave your position better or winning, and that's all you do, hey, I'm not knocking it. All right, it's gonna get you a little ways. You know, some much further than others. If you're naturally talented at calculating, you can get to 2100, sure, okay. But chances are not much further than that at all. Chances are you're going to notice what I noticed, exactly what I noticed back then, which is real simple. When I could concentrate all the time, as soon as I play someone a little better, my pieces are always on the wrong squares, their pieces are always on the right squares, and where I could just tactically batter anybody under X amount of points, there's no possibility to do that, as I, you know, played some people that were a little better than me, a little higher rated. And at that time back, you know, we're talking 15 years ago, the idea was, how do they calculate? There's no way they can calculate that. There's no way they can tactically defend their position so flawlessly. There's no way. They can't. I know they're good, but they can't. It's not, and I didn't realize anything about fundamentals at that time. The term I never heard about no bishops. This is before I think YouTube was invented. Even I think the internet had just been invented. You understand? I never heard nothing about no bad bishops or the Sicilian opening and Dragon Bishop and all the rest, French opening. And I knew the name Gary Kasparov. I heard of Deep Blue because that made the headlines. That was just about it. And I heard one time from somebody, I heard something about Queen's Gambit once. And that was it. Queen goes to the side, says check, takes the pawn back or something. That was it. That was the extent of my chess theory at that point. Alright? And so I just couldn't understand how these people would just evade my attacks all the time before they even got going, before they even got started. And if I did get an attack, I was always a move short. I was always a move short. Very strange, but now we know. Now we know. I was playing advanced checkers. They were playing chess. Real simple. And a big part of that is the imbalances and the fundamentals. And development is, of course, just like king safety center, space, and all the rest, a big part of that. This has been Onyx Chess. Thank you for stopping in. And may you see the board well. And may your pieces find the best squares.